Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Christopher and I work at the Human Rights Measurement Initiative, or HRMI for short. And today I'm going to give you a short demonstration on a rights tracker, in particular look at the economic and social rights of Australia. Now you're more than welcome to follow along with me if you go to your search engine and type in rightstracker.org. If English is not your first language, we do provide the web page within one of the other 4 languages here other than English, or alternatively, you can download a plugin to your Google Chrome browser, which is the Google Translate plugin, and this allows you to translate the page into any of the languages specified here. So let's get started. So the rights tracker is our main tool that we use to get our data across to the people that want to use it most: researchers, journalists, and civil rights groups, in particular to enhance their reports going to the UN. The rights tracker is something that really embodies the work that we do here at HRMI, which is that which gets measured gets improved. Currently, we measure for 13 rights, which is split into 3 broad groups, which is made up of 5 economic and social rights and 8 civil and political rights. We measure across 199 countries currently for our new data that we have available. And also we have data for 39 people groups. You can explore the rights tracker in 3 different ways. You can go to individual rights and you can see how well every country is doing compared to each other, or you can filter this down to see how well regions are doing and see who's the top at the region, at the bottom of the region. But most people first start off with looking at the individual country and seeing how they're doing, and then they compare it to the region or their like neighbors. Or alternatively, you could also look at-risk people groups, for instance, Indigenous people or LGBTQI+ people. But today we're going to start off with the economic and social rights of Australia. So in the browser, in our search box down here, we're going to type in Australia. Now, the main page that you're going to pop up onto when it comes to the country searches is the at-a-glance page. And this summarizes those 3 broad groups, which is the quality of life, which is made up of 5 economic and social rights: the right to education, food, health, housing, and work. And then we have the 8 civil and political rights, which are split into the safety from the state and empowerment rights. And we'll cover those in a later video. But today we're going to be looking at the quality of life rights in Australia. So we're just going to click on our tab here. Now, the first thing that pops up is the overview page. So the overview is going to tell us how well is Australia doing compared to what is possible at its level of income. So what we can see here is that the quality of life bar is incomplete. And the reason why is because we are missing one particular data at the high income level for Australia, which is the right to affordable housing, as the metric that we currently use isn't used in Australia, but it's used in other high income countries. So there's going to be a few that won't have this metric. But they will have, for instance, for housing, if we scroll further down, they will have data on the original one that we used to use and we still use, which is the right to safely manage sanitation at the high income assessment standard. So going back, if we look at the right to education, the right to education is scoring 80.3%. And this is telling us the progressive realization of Australia, ensuring that people are getting this right. And in terms of what is defined by international law, these scores are telling us Australia is trying to do the very best given the level of income that they have available. And the very best that countries can do is getting to 100% with the level of income they have available. And if we look particularly at the right to education, this is 80.3%. So Australia is only doing 80.3% of what should be possible at its level of income. And if we look below these data bars, we have some ranges: very bad, bad, fair, and good. And the right to education is in the bad range. So there's significant room to improve this right to education. Compared with all other high-income countries, Australia is performing close to average when we look across the rights for which we have data for. Now, when you click on these rights, and if you ever get lost of how you define these scores, when you click on them, a summary is going to be given right here. So you will never get lost, or you can just refer back to a YouTube video. If you want to know how these rights are defined by international law, just click on this tab here, and this will tell you according to international law. You can also see what aspects of this right do we measure, and this is split into two different sections. One is the assessment standard for low and middle income countries, and the other is the assessment standard for high income countries. And you can also find the data sources for the underlying indicators that we have information for. You can also switch the view. So you can switch the view from from high income to low and middle income. However, please take note that when it comes to the high income countries, it's best to also and actually just look at the high income assessment standard, as this better reflects the human rights challenges within high income countries. If we scroll further down, we can view these rights in further detail. So if we go to the right to education, for instance, while it's 80.3%, this right is made up of other sub-rights, which is the right to secondary education, the right to quality education in maths, reading, and science. And what we can see here is that the quality of education, maths, and reading scores are quite low at 69.2% and 69.9% of what is possible given the level of income of Australia, respectively. And this sits within the very bad range. So there's significant room to improve these scores. And by improving these scores, we can improve the right to education. But the biggest question is, how do we improve these scores? These scores are crossed with income. So increasing income only increases how far they would have to go. Instead, what we should be looking at is the indicator values. So we can switch this view. And what we can see here is the indicators used to determine the rights, and then we cross them with the income to get the progressive realization of those rights. So in particular, when we look at the secondary school enrollment rate, this is at 92.3%. If we click on this data bar, this is telling us that 92.3% of secondary school age children in Australia are enrolled in secondary school. So there's some room to improve on the score by getting the extra 7.7% into schools. If we look at the achievement of PISA maths tests, this here is at 54.2%, and this is telling us that 54.2% of 15-year-olds in Australia achieved level 3 or better on the PISA maths test. So the way in which we can improve the quality of education in maths, reading, and science is actually by increasing the number of 15-year-olds that are actually achieving at level 3. And this could be something that is lobbied towards the Department of Education within countries. You can also see how the indicator is defined and actually interpret what is level 3 or what is this achievement level. If we scroll further down, you can also see how well Australia is performing by sex. So if we look at the right to education, in terms of getting females into education, Australia is only doing 81.7% of what is possible given its level of income. And for males, it's at 79%. And this is fitting within the bad range. So there's significant rooms to improve these scores. And we can also change this, of course, from high income to low and middle income standards. And we can also track how well Australia is doing over time when it comes to these rights. So for instance, if we go to the quality of education maths, what we can see here is that there is a clear downwards trend in these scores from 86.1% in 2007 down to 69.2% in 2019. So there is significant room to improve these scores and get these scores moving upwards. If we go to the groups here, we can actually change this from all people and go to female and male, and we can see what is different between those two groups over time. And finally, we will also have the people at risk section. So here we can see which people in Australia were identified by the human rights experts in our surveys to be particularly at risk of having one of their economic and social rights violated. So if we continue with the right to education, what we can see here is that these are some of from the respondents, these are the people at risk groups that they have identified as being at risk of having their right violated. So if we see at the top here, 71% of our human rights experts identified Indigenous people as being at risk of having this right violated. So of all the survey respondents for the economic and social rights sections of our survey, 71% of them have identified that Indigenous people are at risk of having this right violated. And then if we go to people with low socioeconomic status, 64% of our human rights experts identified people with low social economic status as being at risk of having this right violated. And this is not saying that these groups have more preference over the other in terms of which one is actually experiencing far more or far less. This is from the perspective of the human rights experts of which groups that they are seeing at that time for 2021 in particular of having their right violated. And we do know that there are people that can fit within these groups that also fit within other groups as well. The main thing when it comes with the survey is when we ask to provide more context about who was particularly unlikely to enjoy one of their rights. So when it comes to the right to education, a lot of survey respondents have asked that children with disabilities due to use of segregated schools and the lack of inclusion policies and support at mainstream schools, leading to low levels of people with disabilities attending higher education. And this is what most respondents have mentioned. People with low socio-economic status, as primary school is not free and the free education system has been systematically underfunded. People with disabilities, especially those who live in remote areas, as the schools at those locations often are not equipped to support these students. People living in remote areas, especially Aboriginal people or Torres Strait Islanders children, as they have often forced to attend schooling in English instead of their native language. And asylum seekers due to limited access to education in detention centres. And you can explore the people at risk section in your own time, and you can look at the other survey respondents when it comes to the other economic and social rights data. You can also go to the rights section and you can see how well Australia is doing to its like neighbours. So if we go to the right to education and we go to secondary school education, and we can filter this down into the Pacific region. New Zealand is doing third in terms of the secondary school education for the Pacific region. New Zealand is at the top at 95.8%, and Australia is third at 89.1%. So it's third amongst all Pacific countries. We can switch this view, of course, to give us a global best benchmark for any of these scores, and we can see how well countries are doing given the global best. However, when it comes to the high income adjustment, there isn't much in the way of changes. If we go to the add country filter, we can actually add in high income groups, and we can see how well Australia is doing amongst all the high income countries that we have data for. And as we can see, Australia is sitting, if we scroll further down, within the middle of the spread here. So Australia is sitting at 89.1%, and New Zealand, its neighbour, is doing 95.8%, and it is the 11th country currently in our survey that has the highest score for high income countries. So that's everything for today. You're more than welcome to follow us on our social media, such as Twitter and our LinkedIn page. You can also go to the YouTube channel where you can find other demos as well as other educational material on who we are and our data. If you want to know more about our methodology, if you go to the methodology section here, there is some short videos on how we measure civil and political rights and economic and social rights. But also if you click on our more in-depth methodology handbook, this will take you to where we store our economic and social right methodology handbook, which you can go through in your own time. And if you want to look at our data and you want to explore our data further, you're more than welcome to download the data by filling out this form here and collecting the recent 2022 data. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have an awesome day.